Welcome to the Word of Mouth Podcast, the weekly podcast breaking down the business, trends, and news shaping modern dentistry. I'm your host, Jeff, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Troy.
It's good to be with you, Jeff.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about marketing. The last couple, we've talked a lot about news in dentistry and some of the legislation that's affecting how hygienists are being handled in practices. But today we're going to go back to kind of what we know best, and that's marketing in the dental industry.
That's right. Lots to unpack there for sure.
So over the last couple of weeks, I've been reading through Seth Godin's book, This is Marketing. And when I kind of got towards the end in chapter 18 and 19 in particular, I came across a few paragraphs and thoughts that he had that I thought were super interesting. So sent that over to you in kind of preparation for this podcast. And we're just going to kind of run through what Seth Godin has to say and how it perfectly aligns with kind of what we're seeing with the dentists we work with and the dentists we talk to.
Yeah, and a big part as he kicks off is the difference between, being seen and being trusted or even gathering attention. At chapter 18, he titles the chapter "Trust is as scarce as attention," which really is true. There's a difference between somebody simply seeing you or having some exposure to you and getting their attention, or even more so being trusted. And it's an important concept as we think about what marketing is really intended to do.
Yeah, one example that he gives, and we'll kind of come back to this later, but he talks about the difference between Land's End, LL Bean, and Victoria's Secret, who all built their businesses primarily off of mailers, just putting a stamp on a piece of mail and sending it to your home, versus maybe the countless others of those mailers that you're getting in the mail that have never built multi-million-dollar businesses. And that's the difference between being seen, having someone pick up that mail and immediately throw it in the recycle bin, and being trusted, where those brands, now you get the LL Bean catalog. If you are kind of one of their customers, you trust them, you're looking at that, you're kind of going through that. In fact, on my desk right now, I have an REI catalog that I go through every time, and primarily it's because I get an ad every so often for 20% off. But again, that's all part of that consideration, is how do you get people not only to see you, but to trust you and to dig deeper, to really investigate and see if they're part of kind of your tribe.
Yeah, and a distinction that he draws in kind of along those lines is the notion of public relations versus publicity. And publicity is really just the notion of that being seen, just having exposure to people, to more people, having them see something about you. Whereas public relations is engineered a different way. There's an intentionality behind it to tell the story so that you're really creating a connection between you and the people that are seeing your brand or seeing what you're offering. And I think that's really an important distinction in this era of digital exposure, where it's really quite simple to be seen by a lot of people. You can pay, a few $100s and have thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of people have some level of exposure to you. The question is that exposure really creating a relationship? Is it something that there is an escalation in the relationship that you have with that person, or with at least some of those people that are seeing your brand?
Precisely. We talk all the time with people about social media in particular, and that difference between publicity and public relations is the difference between virality and kind of being found and being trusted on social media. There are different creators on social media who get millions and millions of views, but who have very few followers comparatively. Conversely, there are celebrities who have millions and millions of views and millions of followers, and that's kind of the difference. Not that millions and millions is necessarily even important for dentists, because they do have such a uniquely small footprint, and that's awesome for dentists, is that it doesn't take... Seth Godin talks in the book as well about 1,000 true fans, and it doesn't take that many people. 1,000 people in your local neighborhood isn't a huge chunk of the market, or 1,500 or 2,000, whatever kind of active patient number you need to create in order to have a stable practice. It's not a huge number. And that's really what you're looking for when you're looking for public relations and trust and those kinds of things, is how do I speak to the people who are going to come and be valuable patients for my practice. And that kind of brings us into our first point, which is a lot of the dentists that we talk to are so focused on ads. That is when they talk to us, when they say, "Well, you do marketing for dentists. What do you do? Like, what makes you different when you run ads?" And the difference between us and a lot of marketing agencies is that we aren't just ads. That's the real difference.
Well, and we talk about how those digital pieces, both ads as well as organic efforts, social media, all of those should be amplifiers of what you're wanting to get attention about. Because attention and trust oftentimes are as much about who you're talking to as what you're saying. If there is a connection between you because of some shared interest or some shared value or whatever it might be, if there is something that you have in common, that is the bridge to trust. That is the bridge to that attention. Whereas if it's somebody with whom you really don't have something in common, or maybe even have a difference of opinion on some key things, it's much more difficult to engage them in a way that creates that trust. And so, part of the way that we approach marketing generally, and the digital piece specifically, whether it's paid ads or organic, is it needs to start with who you're talking to and what message it is that you're trying to convey. And I think that's what's oftentimes lost, where it becomes a bit of a head count. How many people are seeing, or even how many people are clicking. And those can be metrics that help provide directional guidance, but at the same time, ultimately, it is how many are engaging, how many really are developing that trust relationship with you that matters. So
Yeah, no, I think just something that you brought up I want to go back to really quick, is that attention. Seth Godin in the book talks about institution, media, social platforms, politicians are all facing historic skepticism. And so with the amount of ads and the amount of media that we're able to put out, that getting the attention of people is really one of the problems that a lot of marketing faces generally. And dentists are no exception to that rule. Seth Godin talks about there's three kind of places where marketers can be, and dentists trying to market their practice are wearing their marketer hat in this scenario. And they're either ignored, they're spending money or spending effort or time, and nothing's happening. They're sneaking around, they're trying gimmicks, they're trying to be kind of sneak people into the back door, get their attention with rage bait or those kinds of things. And that is borrowed attention. That's attention that happens and then goes away because it doesn't build that trust. And then the last one is when they do build trust, and that's where they have attention. They're getting people that do have those similar and common beliefs and interests, and that's why those people join their tribe. That's why they are able to become patients that are long-term. They give referrals. They want their family to be involved. They want to create that community. And that's where dentists really need to be as local authorities in dentistry. They are the local authority for their area when it comes to dentistry. And that geographic constraint that dentists have in terms of not really wanting to have people drive more than 10 to 15 minutes to the dentist is a huge advantage in that building authority and building trust and getting attention area.
Yeah, and one thing that's important is because of the unique nature of dentists, that being ignored, and then that second tier where it is non-trust related or non-attention related kind of engagement, what we see more than anything else there is commoditization, where people just view that dentist as a transactional provider of a certain service. And so that's where we see the greatest, real jeopardy, and where we see the kind of the volume focus of a lot of marketing efforts really failing is, yes, they are running those ads of, generic terms like dentist near me or general dentistry or family dentist. And all of those are fine. But when you recognize that, in a suburban market or, much less so even in an urban market where there are so many people who are attempting to convey that same broad-reaching message in your geographic area, that you can't own that 10 or 15-minute drive with a message that doesn't differentiate. You're either commoditizing or you're differentiating. And I think that's one of those really key pieces that is lost in the way that a lot of people approach marketing for dentistry. They look and they say, what are the terms that have the highest search volume? How can I get in front of the most eyeballs? And how can I convey a message that is going to appeal to the broadest range of people? All of those is saying, how do I get more people? None of them is asking, how do I create more trust with the people for whom I have the best opportunity to create trust? Those that are the best fit for me. So that was one thing that I really liked about what Seth Godin was talking about here is it's not about the top number, which is how many people are available to create some exposure to. It's getting clear about who are the people at the bottom of that funnel, using that term, generally, that are the best fit for you, and then working up funnel from there to really say, how do we take a public relations approach where we're really targeting specific people and making sure that the message aligns with what we can provide that provides the best outcome for them, not just as it relates to the dental outcome, but the relationship outcome that they're looking for in that, with a dentist. So that's just an important distinction that I think is somewhat unique. It's true in all marketing, in all market segments, but is particularly true for dentists.
Yeah, and I think the trust correlates to the number of voices in that kind of area. If you're the only person telling someone something, it's very easy to trust that one person. But when you have 5 people all telling someone something different, the trust, the threshold to build trust with that person is much higher for each of those 5 voices. And I should just clarify quick before I move on that when we talk about funnel, we're not talking about like funnel hacking or like Russell Brunson kind of like squeeze pages and all of those things. We're just talking simply about the classic marketing funnel, which is kind of there are people, attention is put in at the top, eyeballs, and patients or clients come out at the bottom. And he gives the example of Casey Neistat, a super famous YouTuber who did blogging or vlogging rather every day for years. And he talks about him going live, and he had a YouTube video where he announced he was going live, and that YouTube video had 1 million views. If you went over to his live page, he had 18,000 live viewers. But on that page, he had 1,000 comments, and then about 5 people took action all the way downstream. And so that's kind of your funnel, is you're getting engagement at the top, just a eyeball on a YouTube video. Then you're getting people to engage with you live on a video. Then you're getting people to comment, to take to their keyboards and engage with you even deeper in terms of interacting with you. And then at the very bottom, you're getting people to take the action that you're wanting them to take. And so when dentists think about this, Google Ads might be a top of funnel area, but how do you kind of increase the number of places along that journey that you can connect and deepen that connection with a potential patient or a current patient? Seth Godin had a quote that I just wanted to read. Every click between the first and last makes your funnel more expensive, but you get rid of too many clicks, then no one will trust you enough to buy from you. And that's really what we've seen over the last 20 years in dentistry. The advent of Google Ads allowed everyone to buy more clicks at the top. But slowly over time, we've eliminated all of the internal clicks, any engagement inside the funnel from that first click. And it's making it hard for people to trust dentists because more and more and more dentists are spending and getting in front of eyeballs on Google Ads.
Yeah, and I think, and maybe just to tie that back to something that you said before, where a variety of voices makes it hard to decide who to trust. I think that's actually a little bit of the trust problem of a bygone era. And what I mean by that is I think the bigger trust problem that people have across all industries, but I would say, if we're focusing just on dentistry, it's particularly exacerbated in the dental industry, is the lack of diversity of voices. Because what Google did when they said, hey, we can get you in front of lots of people, that was not something that most industries were super well developed to do. The branding that happens at national or multinational company levels is very different than the branding you can do at a small brick and mortar level. And so as a consequence, we saw less differentiation. Everyone looked to see what was working for someone else, and they had a tendency to copy it, maybe with slight modification, but there really was a consolidation of voices because of Google primarily, but social media generally. There was a lot of copying that occurred. So I think that the problem with trust now for a lot of dental practices is that there is no differentiation. People don't need to trust something if there is no difference between it and its competitors. That if there's no distinction, if that distinction doesn't matter, there doesn't need to be trust. It's only when I'm having to decide between things where I do see an important distinction that I need to make a trust decision. Let me give you just quickly maybe an example of that. If I'm trying to decide between the supplier for my water cooler, who brings in those 5-gallon bottles of water to put on there, and I don't believe it matters. There's no difference between the quality of the water in those 5-gallon things. I'm just going to look at who's cheapest, or whatever. I don't need to trust who's bringing it in because I don't see that there's any difference in what they're bringing in. Now, conversely, if in that same situation, if I have somebody who I believe their water is, fundamentally different or importantly better in some way than the other suppliers, now I have a trust relationship with that product that changes the way that I'm approaching that transaction. Dentists are much the same way. For the person who does not believe that it matters which dentist they go to get their cleanings done, like they literally believe they're all the same, anyone will do just a fine job, that is a buyer persona where trying to build trust is going to be really difficult because they're not looking for trust in that relationship. That is the persona that, those broad term keywords and that very generic marketing to reach as many as possible. That is the persona that it tends to do two things. It tends to reach, of course. It also tends to create. And I think that's the tragedy that we've seen in the dental industry, is that there is an increasing segment of the population who really doesn't see a difference between one dentist or another. So trying to build that trust relationship is difficult, especially when your messaging tells them you're really no different than than anyone else. We're friendly and we're a family-focused practice or whatever. If that's the same message that they're getting from 10 other dentists right in their immediate area, you're not inviting them to make a trust decision. You're inviting them to make a commodity decision.
Yeah. And I think that coupled with that, there is the AI-ification of things.
AI-ification.
I think someone said that AI makes every individual more creative because it allows them to experience more ideas faster. Mm-hmm. But it makes the collective of society less creative because everyone kind of gets to the average. And like you said, if everyone's hearing that same message, they're just going to go who's cheapest or who's loudest. If someone's screaming in your face, if you see, I think that's why DSOs have been so successful, is because everything got kind of commoditized, and then they have the budgets to scream the loudest in that market. And so that's why dentists are feeling that pain from the DSOs, that competition, is because they're trying to scream against a loud screamer rather than just saying something different, having a different message. And
if I can hit on that point, Jeff, when we talk about that funnel, so how many people are seeing you, and then how many people are taking steps, progressing through that funnel to becoming a patient, you really have to think about, why would they come to you? Like, I mean, really take a step back and be honest about it. Why is it that they would choose me over somebody, the 10 other practices that are just as close to them as I am? And if the answer is not articulated in the way that you're presenting your practice to people, and if the answer to that isn't because of clarity of a connection that a somewhat unique connection that you can draw between your practice and your philosophy and who you are as a person and what your interests are and that person, now it becomes, almost a random, like a crapshoot, whether they're going to choose you or not. There's not a reason for them to choose you. You're just hoping that they are. And that isn't marketing. That's gambling. And that's what advertising is. Advertising
that's
oftentimes.
actually a distinction that Seth Godin makes in his book, is that there's a difference between marketing, which is building that brand, building that connection, building that trust, and advertising, which is just rolling the dice.
Yeah, and some of that is driven by the channels that you're choosing, and really how you're developing a strategy to connect with more of the people that align with your practice philosophy, align with your interests, and where you have an advantage to connect with them in a way that that other dentists may not. And if the channel is primarily digital, and if the strategy on digital is primarily volume, like more people seeing your message, that necessarily, you just can't avoid the reality that you have become commoditized, where you really are just gambling that a person is going to choose you over the other practices from which there isn't a difference. You just aren't differentiating. You all look the same. So you're just hoping that maybe they'll choose you because you have a prettier image or whatever else. That's not really a strategy. That's really, like I said, that's just gambling. So I like the distinction that the Godin makes between advertising and marketing. For that point, there is a difference in the strategy that underlies it.
Yeah, and I think while we're on this point, before we kind of move into closing out this podcast, before we kind of move into closing out this episode, I think we want to also talk about the effect it has on patient retention, because when you build trust, those patients continue to come back. And if you're only looking at CAC, at customer acquisition cost per click, cost per conversion, you're missing out on maybe the most important number for a dental clinic, which is lifetime value of a customer. And there's countless studies that say that a patient that is retained for your practice is 5 times cheaper than acquiring a new one. So if you're only looking at cost of acquisition, you're looking at a pretty high number. If you're looking at lifetime value, the revenue and the dollars and cents start to make more sense.
Well, we've seen that stat, and it's kind of ubiquitous across a lot of industries. I would say in the dental industry, the math gets even more extreme, and will continue to do so as more dentists and, driven by DSOs, get more desperate to try to get more new patients. What that will cause is that there will be more effort to entice people away from other practices with cheaper cleanings or whatever promotion it might be, to try to get more to move over to a new practice. So I think that delta between retention and acquisition, it's going to get greater numerically, it's going to get greater emotionally as well. So the idea of building that trust and organizing the marketing strategy around messaging that, can be reasonably expected to make that trust relationship more than just a transaction, it's going to just continue to pay bigger and bigger dividends over time as we see, a continued push towards commoditizing the dental industry. Those that get it right, they're going to have, sustainable practices. They're going to have, practices that are future proof against what will be, just because dentists are feeling a pinch. And when they feel a pinch, there is a tendency to just look for what are the easiest, quickest answers to alleviate that. And we've just kind of been programmed to think the answer to that is more patience, and the answer to more patience is more exposure and more kind of tricks to get people to convert, which are those promotions that aren't sustainable from the standpoint of not creating trust, creating commoditization.
Yes, 100%. And we don't have time to go into today, but it's going beyond patient acquisition cost and lifetime value of a patient, because the unmeasurable metric in that scenario is referrals. And the more trust you build, the higher the lifetime value, but also the more referrals you're more likely to get. So
yeah,
I think that it's just a multifaceted thing where it just absolutely compounds and the numbers kind of get crazy.
Yeah, and again, we won't dive into the math of it, but and you said it's immeasurable, and we probably not the term you intended to use. It is measurable. It's just often forgotten, or there isn't enough attention paid to it. But you're exactly right. I mean, when you look at who you're attracting, you want to attract patients that connect well with you, and within that is going to be a subset of evangelists, and you become much better at. And there's people that are naturally going to have a predisposition to be those kind of evangelists that are out there referring you. You increase the probability of not only attracting that type of person to your practice, but encouraging them to engage in that type of evangelism by building that trust and having that differentiation be at the heart of not only what you say about yourself, but how you conduct business and what you make your practice personality on a daily basis. So,
yeah, and I should clarify, when I said unmeasurable, I more meant that it's harder to average. So lifetime value is easier to kind of average out,
for sure,
because the dollars spent are all kind of the same. But like we've said before on the podcast, we had one of the patients of the clinic that we work with, refer 23 people in 6 months. And so it can be a crazy number if you find the right people, and not everyone who you build trust with will be that kind of person. And so that kind of averaging is harder to necessarily measure, where you say, I get a great new patient in, I can expect them to give me 15 referrals. That's just harder. That's more,
for sure, got it,
not unmeasurable, like you said, but harder to project.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to touch on quickly before we wrap it up is the idea that we've kind of been dumping on Google Ads. And I want to set the record straight that Google Ads are 100% a great part of a holistic strategy.
Yeah. And what we talk, the way that we like to present it is it's a question of whether it is the starting point and oftentimes the ending point of your marketing efforts, or whether it is an amplification of the strategy that you've built more holistically. Because Google Ads, it's just a tool, that's all it is. But if it's the only tool you have, it's going to be difficult to really accomplish and build a sustainable practice. An example that we've used in the past is, if you consider Google Ads like a hammer, you're not going to be able to build an entire house using just a hammer. But at the same time, if you're building a house, there will be times when the hammer is the appropriate tool for what you need. That's what we're really talking about when we're looking at building a sustainable, growing, and compounding practice, is that we look across the whole range of tools, and what we're trying to do is make sure that we're aligning the right tools with where the practice is at present, not only in terms of their growth cycle, but also in terms of their marketing cycle. How well have they already differentiated? And how well are they connected with their local communities, or, some of those questions. And based on that, developing a strategy for which tool or tools are the right ones to deploy now, and how do we use them the right way. So Google Ads is a powerful tool, and it can be used to great effect. What we see too often is it being used in the wrong way and in the wrong place. And so it's kind of like saying, hey, I'm going to turn a hammer around and use it to try to screw in a screw. I'm using the hammer the wrong way and for the wrong job. That's what we see a lot of times with Google. It can't be, and I know this is, a strong statement, but it's true. It cannot be the first place that you're trying to market, because almost invariably the messaging that you do are going to compromise your positioning long term. You're going to find that your profitability continues to erode because of increased competition. And because of the way that Google is profiling those that they send, you're just going to end up getting more of the wrong types of patients coming your way. Even if your flow is still good, you're going to find that your quality of patient continues to erode unless you're using it in concert with other things and in a way both targeting and messaging that builds your practice, builds your trust, builds your connection with people versus just commoditizing your practice.
Yeah, and let's also be clear that when we say it can't be your first, if you are running Google Ads and that's the only way you're advertising right now, don't turn them off. Let them keep running, but shift your focus from trying to optimize the crap out of Google Ads and figure out ways to build downstream so that Google isn't the first focus, isn't the only focus of your advertising funnel. You still need to keep the lights on. So
for sure. And
there's a transition period.
Let me soften it just a little bit from what I said. The problem with having it be your first and only thing is that we haven't seen anyone that does that in a way that creates sustainability. It is all about more, just more in the door without any consideration of how those people are aligning with the practice that you're trying to build. So you're exactly right, Jeff. If it's the patient flow, if it's the only mechanism for getting new patients, and you need those new patients just to meet payroll, then the right answer is not necessarily turn it off tomorrow. But there does also need to be some recognition that it's going to get more expensive. So if your margins are already thin, relying on Google and trying to just do the more, it's going to get more expensive, which is going to erode those margins further. It's going to get more competitive, meaning that there's going to be fewer available. And, there's certainly a lot of trends pointing to the fact that it's just going to be, you're going to be fishing from a thinner pond of people because there's other ways that people are getting information now. So to your point, we're not advocating sort of a practice suicide by cutting off the only channel that you have. But at the same time, we need to be very blunt and say it's not a winning strategy long term to rely only on that channel, in part because almost invariably the messaging and the strategy that's being utilized there is not going to be right. There are ways to improve your targeting. There are ways to improve your messaging, to leverage that tool the way it's meant to be leveraged, and thumbs up on that. But there's other tools that need to be, clipped to your tool belt as you look to, build the practice that you're looking to practice and grow it in the way that you want to grow it.
Yeah, and to use your analogy, if you're building a house, a hammer is better in most situations than just your bare hands. But the more tools you can add to your tool belt, the better off you're going to be. So don't chuck the hammer, but it's worth keeping that and then building on top of that. And I think also I just wanted to point out quick that we do see this with dentists on both sides. We've had clients who come to us and they want to just dump ads immediately, and we have to tell them, no, you need to keep patient flow going. We can't abandon ship. But then we've also had clients who are like, why do we need to talk about why even run ads? Sorry, that's not both sides.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. And we've had clients who are saying, why even run ads? Like, I don't want to talk about ads. All I want is the other tools. And they're trying to abandon that altogether. And so there's the dentists we work with and dentists across the board are kind of, you're not alone if you feel kind of pushback on any of these ideas. But it is what we've seen work throughout the practices we work with and in our previous life marketing for our own practices.
And I will say one other element that we've maybe skipped over that is important as you're starting to grow a practice. If you've had Google Ads running, they also provide a great data source. That's a way that we oftentimes will utilize ads, not only to generate revenue into the form of new patients, but also to be able to evaluate the marketplace, evaluate some messaging, because it is direct response and because you can just pay for exposure. It does allow you to test concepts and to gather data to understand the marketplace and the practice perception that is really difficult to duplicate through other more organic channels. And so, again, we do want to make clear it is a very useful tool as long as it's being used the right way and for the right purposes.
Absolutely. And to kind of wrap things up, just to recap what we've talked about, trust is a scarce resource. Attention, less scarce, but trust for sure is something that needs focus. It requires your attention as a dentist. General marketing and general advertising is the trap in dental marketing right now. That's where there is the biggest risk to practices of wasting ad spend, wasting time, money, attention, because it doesn't create a valuable long-term resource in terms of bringing in patients that trust and value you as a clinician and as a practice. And so as we'll probably continue this conversation a little bit next week. There's still several points that we have to cover, but we want to wrap it up for anyone listening to this. And we appreciate you. If you're listening to this, please subscribe, leave a comment, let us know what's working in your practice, in your area. We're here on YouTube. That's the best place to comment and connect with us. But we're also anywhere where you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. So please, we'd love to connect with dentists and learn kind of what's working, what's not, and be a sounding board in terms of growing your practice and building a successful practice.
Yeah, it's always fun talking about these things. It's interesting stuff. There's a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of risks. And the biggest risk is not recognizing the market's changing and changing with it.
Yes. So if you'd like, we'll link Seth Godin's book. It's not a dental marketing book, but it's just general, but it reads like a dental playbook. If you'd rather not read a marketing book, which is mostly theory, you'd rather read it in more of a fable form, we wrote our book on how we do marketing for dentistry, the Inside Out Practice. You can get a free copy by clicking the link in the description. Otherwise, thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.